Good morning. Welcome. All right. So I have homework 15 from you, depreciation. I hope that you found it relatively simple. The next thing on your calendar is our final exam. That's a week from today in the afternoon. So we're going to have it here in this classroom. We've already talked about the format of the exam and so on. Any questions before we start talking about ethics? All right. By the way, regarding this homework assignment, I'm going to give it to the grader today, and I've asked him to grade it as quickly as possible. He assured me that the two assignments, does he have two assignments? Yeah, I think he's got two assignments right now. He assured me that he's going to have those graded by the end of this week. And so when they're available, I'll post the scores online and put them in the box that's outside my office door if you want to collect your old assignments to take a look at as you prepare for the final. Question? That's right. Yeah, it's going to be here in this classroom. You're not going to use Excel during the exam. That's right. Are there other questions? Okay. So I've already handed out the Code of Ethics. Not this. All right. The National Society of Professional Engineers. Now, we've talked about ethics a couple of times this semester. During benefit to cost analysis, for example, we talked about how sometimes the analysis can be warped depending on unrealistic expectations. And we engineers love to have projects going. Not only is it exciting and interesting, but it also pays the bills if you have work to do. And so engineers are going to tend to say, yes, we should do a project, a little bit more than maybe they should, because having the project means that they have a job. And that's not always the best thing. You know, there are some projects that should be rejected, and we have to consider all the costs appropriately and so on. But that's not really the only ethical situation that engineers face. There's actually a huge range of circumstances that will come up during your life where you have to make a decision, and your motives may be in conflict with what's best for the client, for example. And so that's when it's useful to have a code of ethics to reflect on what your responsibilities are to the engineer, to the client that you have. What are your responsibilities to the public safety? Because sometimes the people that are employing you are going to be wanting projects, or they're going to want aspects of their project that may be harmful to people. It may be anything from constructing a facility that doesn't have adequate safety. It may be discharge of pollutants into the environment that sometimes pollutants are legal, but it's still not ethical, especially in a lot of developing countries. The so-called third world have very weak environmental regulations, but that doesn't necessarily make it moral or ethical to have really high pollution coming from a factory in a country like that. So what we're going to do today for class is look over this Code of Ethics for Engineers document. You can see it's very lengthy. And rather than just having you read it, which would maybe be a little bit dull for the class, I've put together some questions where I'm going to ask you to search for what is the rule that corresponds to the question involved. And so here's a handout. What you're going to do is search through the rules and find out, number one, write down the section that applies to the situation that's described, and then also write, what does the rule mean? Like, how does it guide what the engineer's behavior would be? And once you've had a chance to consider some of these, we're going to have a brief discussion in class and talk about what the implications are of each of these situations. Okay, so everybody has a copy of the handout. So you're going to have to scan. By the way, the Code of Ethics is on both sides of the paper. So use the headings to try and search through here. And of course, it's okay to collaborate with your classmates as you go through it. But let's take a few minutes to take a look at questions 1 through 4 and interpret the rules and find the relevant one as far as what's ethical behavior. Let's discuss the first question on the handout. All right, the first question on the handout says it's about bribing a public official. So which section of the Code of Ethics addresses it, and is it allowed? Was anybody able to find in this sea of text what section talks about bribery? Okay, under, so you found it under Professional Obligations 4, Part C. Which one? Okay. Rules of Practice 4C. Engineers shall not solicit or accept financial or other viable consideration directly or indirectly from outside agents in connection with the work for which they are responsible. Good. However, that's talking about engineers receiving the bribe. So what about an engineer trying to make a bribe to someone else? Let's say, for instance, that your company is trying to get a job. It's trying to win a contract from one of the ministries. And so, according to this rule of ethics, is it okay for you to give money to the person who's making the decision in order for your company to receive that bid? It's not that you're receiving the money, it's actually you're paying the money out. 5B, what does it say in 5B? If we scroll over to 5B, is it on the screen there? Okay, yeah, here it is. 5B, engineers shall not offer, give, solicit, or receive, either directly or indirectly, any contribution to influence the award of a contract by public authority, or which may be reasonably construed by the public as having the effect or intent of influencing the award of a contract. So that basically means that you can't give money to someone so that your company gets the business. And actually, this happens, unfortunately, quite a lot. In some of the developing countries, for a long time, it was notorious if you wanted to get work in the oil sector in certain African countries that the companies had to pay a bribe to the oil minister or to some of his subordinates in order to get the contract. So why do you think that's not allowed? Why is it wrong? Unfair? Okay, so who's it unfair to? The other companies, right. In a way, it's also unfair to the shareholders of the companies, because if you think about it this way, if one person is going to be giving gifts, then suddenly all of the companies who are submitting bids have to give bribes to the public officials, and then that can be a big expense, and so it cuts into profits that otherwise would have gone to the shareholders of the company. So it's unfair to your competitors, and it's also unfair to the people who own your company. So any comments about that? Why else is it wrong, besides just being unfair? The person making the decision, how should they decide? Should they decide which company to choose based on who will pay the highest bribe? Is that the way to decide who's going to do, like build a new bridge? Or is that how to decide what company should be selected for the safety inspection of a fire system? Obviously, no. You shouldn't choose based on who's willing to pay the highest bribe, but you should choose who's going to do work based on who's the most qualified and who offers the best value for the project. All right. Any other questions or comments or anything about that one? The first question? Yes? Okay, good question. Yeah, the answer itself is 5B, because 5B is talking about paying a bribe, and the question asks bribing a public official. So it's sort of implying that you are the engineer who wants to bribe the public official. Is it allowed for you to do that? And 5A, hold on, where is it? 4C is if you're receiving the bribe, and that's not allowed either, but it's, yeah, 5B is the answer. 5B, because 5B is about when you're offering the bribe. So neither one is allowed. You can't receive a bribe or offer a bribe. But the question was asking about the engineer who's thinking about making a payment to a public official. And so 5B says that that's not permitted. Okay. So the next question was about the rules of practice. What happens if someone overrules your judgment and you think it's going to endanger people's lives? So the rules of practice is section 2 of the document. Rules of practice. Was anybody able to find what section it talks about? Yeah. That's right. 1A, right at the top there. So the main job that engineers have is to keep the public safe. That is your paramount responsibility. Actually, keeping the public safe is more important than your responsibility to your employer, because safety is more important than profits. And so if someone tells you that you should use less reinforcing steel in a structure than you know has to be there, or if someone asks you to design a toxic waste dump right next to the water treatment plant, or any other thing where you know that the safety of the public is going to be overruled, then it says in that rules of practice that you're supposed to notify your employer or client and other such authority as may be appropriate. What do you think that means, other such authority as may be appropriate? Let me show you what I'm highlighting here. See what's highlighted in blue there? So let's say that your employer, the company you work for, says, we're going to do this thing that's risky, but that's that. The decision is finished. And the client, the people who are paying you for the engineering services, they agree with that as well. But still, deep down, you know it's not safe. So you shall notify other such authority as may be appropriate. What are your options if both of the people have overruled your judgment? The government. Yeah. And so you can notify, there's probably a government agency, the regulator. It may be a safety inspector. It may be, depending on what project you're working on, it could vary on what aspect of the government is going to get involved. But what if even the government isn't acting responsibly? Do you have any other options? You can always tell a newspaper, right? They're whistleblowing. And so there are plenty of cases where the private company was doing the wrong thing, the government was looking the other way, maybe because a public official was being bribed, and so then someone tipped off a newspaper. And so then the flaw in the system was uncovered because of that way. Everyone has heard about Edward Snowden, right? Edward Snowden, he was a whistleblower. For him, he had concerns about what was happening in the United States, and he took his concerns to his supervisor, and ultimately he decided to become a whistleblower. So sometimes people make decisions when they think that the safety, the welfare of the public is in jeopardy. All right. So maybe you'll face a situation, hopefully not. Hopefully when your employer will respond to your concerns. All right. Summarize the professional obligation described in 5A. So 5A under professional obligations. Any one of you volunteer what you wrote for the summarizing what it says in 5A? Yes. Okay. Engineers shouldn't receive money or gifts. Why do you think engineers shouldn't receive money or gift, specifically from, let's see, from material or equipment suppliers? Let me go back here to the code. So section, engineers shall not receive financial or other considerations from material or equipment suppliers. I worked for a company and I was a hydraulic engineer. So I was designing drainage networks, and the company I worked for did mostly transportation projects. So I sometimes had to decide if in a certain project are we going to use concrete pipe or plastic pipe. I was the one who was making the decision. So what would be wrong if I'm receiving a gift from the concrete pipe company? It's sort of a bribe, yeah. It's sort of like my judgment should be based on what's the cheapest, what's the most efficient, what will work best. My judgment shouldn't be based on who bought me lunch. And actually, that's a situation that happens to me. There was a company that sold pipes, and they wanted to come to our office during lunchtime and just tell us about their pipes. And they said, listen to the presentation, and then we'll buy lunch for the office. And I was a relatively young engineer at the time, and I thought, okay, we'll listen to their pipes and we'll eat their food. And so me and a few other engineers had their presentation, and then a couple of weeks later, the sales rep started to call me on the phone. Oh, just wondering about your projects. Are you going to use our pipes? And I started to feel, in the back of my mind, I started to feel like a little bit guilty or obligated, like I had to remember them when I was making my decisions about how big should the pipe be, what should the material be, who is the vendor that's preferred. And it's just better if you have no ulterior motive other than what's best for the client and what's going to work best in the situation. And if you think about it, in a way, your integrity is being threatened for a sandwich, you know? And it wasn't even a very good sandwich, really. So like for $5 now, I have to remember and try and keep happy some sales rep. So it's something that after that one time, it's just feeling the pressure, and I don't even want to have to think about that. So now I don't want to know anything other than the technical specifications for the materials that I'm designing. So that's kind of the idea behind 5A, that you shouldn't receive any consideration for specifying a product. So maybe you'll be a transportation engineer who is looking at asphalt. Maybe you're going to be a structural engineer who's going to be specifying different concrete types. And so whatever it is, you should make your decisions based on the fundamentals. All right, last one. Rule of practice 3C. So let's go to rule of practice 3C. Rule of practice, all right, back on the first page. 3C. It says, engineers shall make no statements, criticisms, or arguments on technical matters that are inspired or paid for by interested parties unless they have prefaced their comments by explicitly identifying the interested parties on whose behalf they are speaking and by revealing the existence of any interest the engineers may have in the matters. That's really a long sentence there, but all right. So the question is asking, what if you have research that's being funded by an oil company? So an oil company, maybe ExxonMobil, is giving you money for your research. And now they're asking you to maybe to testify before a panel or to be there for a hearing. What does this rule say is your responsibility? It's not that you should have no comment. It's that if you're going to make a comment, you have to tell everyone that I'm a paid representative by this company that's been supporting me. In other words, the public looks up to engineers. You know, there are certain professions that people really respect. You know, doctors, for example. People really respect doctors. People respect firefighters, people who are in the military. And engineering is another profession where it serves society, especially civil engineering serves society. And so people have sort of a high level of respect, and because of that, they assume that engineers are going to be unbiased, that they're going to offer their opinions in a balanced way. And so if you've been receiving money from someone, then you need to acknowledge that you've received money if you're going to be saying comments that are favorable on their behalf. And in a way, you know, last semester I remember a student, after hearing that, was very surprised. They were saying, well, then everyone's going to know you're biased. And of course, you know, like if you're biased as an engineer, you should try and avoid bias, but if you've been receiving support for your research, for example, then probably you're going to have good feelings about the company that's been giving money for your research. And so basically the Code of Ethics says that if you're making public statements, they're always supposed to be truthful. And because your view of the truth may be colored by who's paying your paycheck, then you need to acknowledge that. You need to say who you're representing. Okay. So that's it for ethics. We're just going to do a very brief thing on ethics. The last thing I have for you is our end of semester course outcomes survey. And you've, I'm sure, seen these before. There's a list of things that we're supposed to cover in the semester. And if you feel like you learned it, then you'd select 5. That means strongly agree that you do know the material. If you feel like you didn't learn it, then you select 1. And then there's the numbers in between. That's just basically indicating how well you feel like certain outcomes from the course have been achieved.